Rex Sherman is a demon that walks among us, a predator that ruined families.
For over a decade, the haunting mystery of the Long Island serial killer Lisk, also known as the Gilgo Beach Killer, has captivated and horrified the public. This cunning predator is suspected of claiming the lives of at least 10 to 16 victims, primarily women engaged in sex work. Their remains were unearthed along the remote stretches of Ocean Parkway on Long Island's South Shore. As of 2024, the killer's identity remains a chilling secret, and the investigation continues, solidifying this case as one of the most infamous unsolved serial murders in American history. The disappearance of Shannan Gilbert in 2010. The Long Island serial killer case was set in motion on the night of May 1, 2010, when 24-year-old Shannan Gilbert, an escort from Jersey City, New Jersey, mysteriously disappeared, hired through Craigslist by a client named Joseph Brewer. Gilbert had arrived at his home in the secluded Oak Beach community near Gilgo Beach. Not long after her arrival, she began behaving erratically, making a frantic 911 call in which she claimed that someone was trying to kill her.
State police.
Yeah, there's somebody after me.
I'm sorry?
There's somebody after me.
Panicked, Gilbert ran through the neighborhood, banging on doors and screaming for help, only to vanish into the darkness. Despite the alarming nature of her call and her family's growing concerns, law enforcement initially treated her case as a standard missing persons report, speculating that she may have either fled or met an accidental death. What no one could have foreseen was that this disappearance would be the catalyst for uncovering one of the most horrifying serial killer cases in modern U.S., the grim discovery on Gilgo Beach, December 2010. 7 months after Gilbert's disappearance, on December 11, 2010, while police were conducting a routine search for her body along Ocean Parkway, they stumbled upon a shocking discovery: the skeletal remains of a woman wrapped in burlap. Over the next few days, the remains of 3 more women were found nearby, all within a quarter-mile stretch of Gilgo Beach. The bodies were quickly identified as missing sex workers, each of whom had been reported missing between 2007 and 2010. The victims were Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25, a Connecticut woman who vanished in July 2007. Melissa Barthelemy, 24, a sex worker from the Bronx, who went missing in July 2009. Megan Waterman, 22, last seen in June 2010, from Maine. Amber Lynn Costello, 27, a North Babylon, New York resident, last seen in September 2010. The discovery of these bodies led authorities to a chilling conclusion: they were likely dealing with a serial killer who had been targeting vulnerable women, particularly sex workers. Expansion of the search, and more victims. In the months that followed, police expanded their search, combing the desolate stretches of marshland and brush along Ocean Parkway. By spring 2011, 6 more sets of remains had been found, bringing the total number of known victims to 10. The additional remains were identified as Jane Doe. 6 partial remains found in Manorville in 2000 matched those discovered at Gilgo Beach. John Doe, an unidentified Asian male, believed to have been between 17 and 23 years old, who was killed several years earlier. Jane Doe 3, also known as Peaches, found in Nassau County in 1997 and connected to remains discovered in 2011. Baby Doe, the skeletal remains of a toddler, found wrapped in a blanket near the body of Peaches, possibly her daughter. Jane Doe 7, partial remains found in both Manorville in 2003 and Gilgo Beach in 2011. These discoveries, while horrifying, indicated that the killer had likely been active for many years, possibly even before 2007, when the earliest of the Gilgo Beach victims were reported missing. Shannan Gilbert's body found December 2011. On December 13, 2011, over a year after her disappearance, Shannan Gilbert's remains were finally found in a marshy area not far from the other bodies. However, her cause of death has remained a point of debate. Police suggested that Gilbert's death was accidental, perhaps caused by exposure or drowning after she ran into the marsh and became disoriented. Her family, however, disagreed, maintaining that Shannon was also a victim of the serial killer. An independent autopsy commissioned by her family suggested that she may have been strangled, though the official cause of death remains undetermined. Whether or not Gilbert was indeed one of the Long Island serial killer's victims continues to be a subject of speculation. The victims, a pattern emerges. As investigators pieced together the victims' profiles, a disturbing pattern emerged. Most of the victims were young women involved in sex work, many of whom advertised their services on websites like Craigslist or Backpage. The killer targeted these vulnerable individuals, luring them with promises of work, only to murder them and dispose of their remains along the secluded shores of Gilgo Beach. Several of the victims were petite, weighing around 100 pounds, and all disappeared after arranging meetings with clients. The bodies were often wrapped in burlap, suggesting a methodical and organized killer who had premeditated the disposal of his victims. Theories and suspects. Over the years, various theories have emerged regarding the identity of the Long Island serial killer. Some suggest the killer could be a local resident with intimate knowledge of the area, while others have speculated that he may have law enforcement or military experience, given the precision with which he carried out the crimes. Joseph Brewer. Joseph Brewer, the last client of Shannon Gilbert, was initially considered a suspect, as he was one of the last people to see her alive. However, Brewer has consistently denied any involvement in the murders, and no concrete evidence links him to the killings. Dr. Peter Hackett. Another person of interest was Dr. Peter Hackett, a former Oak Beach resident who allegedly called Shannon Gilbert's mother shortly after her disappearance, claiming that he had run a home for troubled women and had cared for Shannon the night she vanished. Hackett later denied making the call and claimed he had no involvement in the case, though his behavior raised suspicion. Gilbert's family even filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Hackett, though he was never charged with any crime related to the murders. James Burke. James Burke, the former Suffolk County police chief, became a controversial figure in the investigation. Known for his aggressive demeanor, Burke was accused of hindering the FBI's involvement in the case, raising questions about why he wanted to limit external help. Burke was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, including assault and obstruction of justice, but some theorized that his interference had severely delayed the investigation into the serial killer. However, no evidence has emerged to directly connect Burke to the murders. John Bittrolff. In 2014, John Bittrolff, a Suffolk County resident, was convicted of the murders of two women in the early 1990s. His profile as a serial killer and the fact that he lived near the dumping grounds led some to wonder if he could be responsible for the Gilgo Beach murders. However, despite initial speculation, no direct evidence has been found to link Bittrolff to the Long Island serial killer's victims. The belt. A key piece of evidence. In a surprising move in January 2020, Suffolk County Police released an image of a black leather belt found near one of the crime scenes. The belt had the initials WH or HM inscribed on it, leading investigators to believe it may have belonged to the killer. This was one of the first pieces of physical evidence to be publicly disclosed, and police hoped that someone in the public might recognize it. However, the release of the belt image also raised questions about why it had taken nearly a decade for authorities to make this information public. Some speculated that police had deliberately withheld evidence, either to protect the integrity of the investigation or due to internal mismanagement. The revelation reignited public interest in the case, with online forums buzzing with speculation about the possible significance of the belt. Challenges in the investigation. One of the primary challenges in solving the Long Island serial killer case has been the remoteness of the crime scenes. The bodies were dumped in isolated areas, and the killer appeared to take significant precautions to avoid leaving behind forensic evidence. Additionally, the victims' transient lifestyles made it difficult for investigators to track their movements or identify the exact point at which they encountered the killer. The involvement of sex workers also posed challenges, as many of the victims' families were reluctant to come forward, and the victims themselves often lived on the fringes of society, making it harder for police to piece together their stories. The connection to other unsolved murders. As investigators continued to explore potential links between the Long Island serial killer Lisk and other unsolved cases, a chilling theory began to take shape. Some speculated that Lisk may not be confined to Long Island alone. The modus operandi targeting vulnerable women, particularly sex workers, and disposing of their remains in remote areas bore similarities to other unsolved cases across the United States. In particular, law enforcement began investigating possible connections between Lisk and unsolved murders in Atlantic City, New Jersey. In 2006, the bodies of 4 women, all of whom were involved in sex work, were found in a drainage ditch behind a motel near Atlantic City. The women had been laid in a row, face down, and their bodies were positioned close to a major road, a disturbing parallel to the Gilgo beach victims. While no definitive links were ever established, the similarities led some to believe that the Long Island serial killer may have traveled between states to commit his heinous crimes. The unsolved murders in Atlantic City gave rise to the theory of another serial killer. Dubbed the Eastbound Strangler, 4 women were found strangled and left behind a motel in 2006. Though no definitive evidence linked these murders to the Long Island case, the geographic proximity and similarities in victimology raised the possibility of a connection. Both killers seemed to target women in vulnerable positions, most of whom were involved in sex work, and left their remains in isolated, off-the-beaten-path locations. Could it be that Lisk was responsible for murders across state lines, eluding capture for decades by spreading out his crimes? This chilling possibility continues to be explored by law enforcement. The debate over Shannan Gilbert's death continued to stir emotions among both investigators and her family. While the official stance of the police was that her death was likely accidental, possibly caused by a combination of panic and disorientation after her 911 call.
Somebody's after me. Please.
Are you in Suffolk County or Nassau County?
I'm in Long Island.
Where on Long Island are you?
No. 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 No, stop, no.
Shannan Gilbert, a Craigslist sex worker and resident of Jersey City, New Jersey, traveled from Manhattan to meet a client, Joseph Brewer, at his home at 8 The Fairway, Oak Beach, New York. Shannan was driven to Oak Beach from Manhattan by her driver, Michael Pack. Neither one was familiar with the area, neither one had been there before.
Her family remained steadfast in their belief that she was a victim of the Long Island serial killer. Gilbert's mother, Mari, became a tireless advocate for justice, calling for a more thorough investigation into her daughter's death. In 2015, Mari Gilbert commissioned an independent autopsy, which suggested that Shannan had suffered injuries consistent with strangulation, further fueling suspicions that her death was no accident. The tension between the family and law enforcement escalated, leading to legal battles and public protests. Tragically, in 2016, Mari Gilbert was murdered by her other daughter, who had a history of mental illness, adding another layer of heartbreak to the family's long fight for answers. Shannan Gilbert's case became emblematic of the challenges faced by families of the victims, battling not only the trauma of loss but also what they perceived as systemic indifference or incompetence from authorities. Her disappearance and death remain a point of contention in the overall investigation, with some believing that solving her case could unlock crucial clues to the identity of the Long Island serial killer. As the bodies continued to be discovered, investigators began to link the Gilgo 4 victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, to earlier unsolved cases. The discovery of Jane Doe 6, whose partial remains had been found in Manorville years earlier, suggested that the killer's reach extended well beyond 2007. Manorville, located in eastern Long Island, became a key site in the investigation. The dismembered remains found there hinted at a more brutal phase of the killer's modus operandi, raising questions about whether the same person had refined his methods over time. Detectives were troubled by the killer's ability to elude capture for so long. Not only did he avoid leaving significant forensic evidence, but his choice of victims, often transient individuals with minimal digital footprints, made it more difficult for law enforcement to track his movements or build a solid timeline of his activities. The FBI had taken a more active role in the investigation, working alongside local law enforcement to reevaluate evidence and explore potential leads. Psychological profilers suggested that the Long Island serial killer was likely a man in his 30s or 40s at the time of the murders, someone who was familiar with the South Shore area and may have led an unassuming life. He may have had a job that provided him with the flexibility to travel and commit these crimes without arousing suspicion. The methodical nature of the murders, particularly the use of burlap to wrap the victims' bodies, suggested a killer who was organized and possibly had some form of law enforcement or military training. Additionally, the careful disposal of the bodies in such a remote area indicated that the killer was deeply familiar with the terrain and knew where to hide his victims without attracting attention. As forensic technology advanced, investigators began to re-examine the evidence using modern DNA analysis techniques. The hope was that, much like the Golden State Killer case, genetic genealogy could provide a breakthrough. By 2023, authorities had begun submitting DNA profiles from the crime scenes to genealogical databases, hoping to identify relatives of the suspect. The Long Island serial killer case has garnered significant media attention over the years, with numerous documentaries, podcasts, and books dedicated to unraveling the mystery. Programs such as The Killing Season and HBO's The Long Island Serial Killer: A Mother's Hunt for Justice have brought the case to a wider audience, keeping it in the public consciousness. Online sleuths and true crime enthusiasts have also played a role in keeping the case alive. Websites like WebSleuths and Reddit have dedicated threads where users discuss potential suspects, theories, and developments. The victims' families continue to advocate for justice, urging law enforcement to find the killer and bring closure to their loved ones' cases. By 2024, the advancement of forensic technology had injected new hope into the investigation. DNA evidence, which had previously been too degraded to analyze, was now being re-examined with more sophisticated techniques. Genetic genealogy had become a game-changer in cold case investigations, and many believe that it could provide the key to finally identifying the Long Island serial killer. In addition to DNA advancements, investigators were also utilizing geospatial technology to map out the killer's likely movements and develop a clearer understanding of where the bodies had been left. By analyzing cell tower data and historical weather patterns, law enforcement hoped to narrow down the time frames in which the victims had been killed and potentially identify patterns in the killer's behavior. Public interest in the case remained high, with documentaries, podcasts, and online forums continuing to explore the mystery of the Long Island serial killer. Families of the victims continued their fight for justice, urging law enforcement to keep the investigation active and prevent the case from going cold. The Long Island serial killer case remains one of the most perplexing and chilling unsolved mysteries in American history. As the 14th anniversary of Shannon Gilbert's disappearance approached, the communities of Long Island and the victims' families held on to the hope that advancements in technology and renewed efforts from law enforcement might finally lead to the identification and capture of the elusive predator. While the killer's identity remains a mystery, the legacy of his crimes has forever scarred the victims' families and cast a long shadow over Long Island. The case serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the dark forces that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly peaceful communities,